Laura, you've had a unique experience because you've been following the AfD in Germany, which, like we said, got very high votes in actually three recent elections. There's a more recent one in Brandenburg, if I remember. And you've also been covering the US election in Atlanta and the lead up to it. So can you just tell me a little bit of the experience of both of those, kind of like following both elections as a reporter?
Yeah, so I actually looked into, what does apply to both coverings of the elections. And I think as a journalist, I found that covering especially right-wing movements like the AfD, for example, in Germany, it requires a delicate balance, right? So on the one hand, their presence in election needs to be reported as part of the democratic process, of course. And on the other hand, it's just essential to not provide an uncritical platform for harmful ideologies. So, the responsibility to avoid normalizing extremist rhetoric is for me an ongoing challenge. And just, let's give you an example from my own reporting in Germany, which also applies to the US political landscape. Let's take, for example, the frequent use of terms like quote unquote refugee crisis or migration wave in the media, right? So these phrases often reflect the language of right-wing populist parties like the AfD. Or in the US, you often hear the term migrant crime used by Trump and parts of the GOP. And I've become extremely cautious about, adopting these narratives uncritically, because the language we use has real consequences and drive public opinion, right? So phrases like these frame migration as this uncontrollable, threatening force, and it only adds to public fear and anxiety, and it plays directly into the hands of political groups advocating for tougher immigration policies. And of course, we can't forget about the broader issue of misinformation, which is a huge challenge on its own. I'm pretty sure we're going to dive into that later. But the main point is I've learned to be hyper aware of how easily language can reinforce certain political narratives, often, without us realizing it.
And I think that's a great place for us to jump off of. One of the things that journalists, especially journalists on our network, are really trying to figure out, journalists around the world, is how do we combat electoral disinformation, electoral misinformation? So I want to ask, and this is not directed towards anyone specifically, but just as it comes up, what are some instances of electoral disinformation and misinformation that you've seen? This could range from anything about misinformation about the voting process or even the results of the votes. It could range to, we've had a lot of disinformation about, the very, heard around the world in America, eating the cats and dogs in Springfield, Illinois, over disinformation, but has really spread around everywhere. So just bouncing off everyone, while you were covering your elections, what disinformation did you see, and how did your teams work to try to combat that?
I can jump right in if you guys don't mind. So, looking especially into the AfD, I mean, they are notorious for spreading misleading claims, especially when it comes to immigration. So that's like their big topic, right, as is it in the US. They've exaggerated statistics and falsely connected asylum seekers to rising crimes. But they also question the reality of climate change and downplayed the need for action. And during the pandemic, they took it further, right, amplifying conspiracy theories about COVID-19 and the vaccines. And yeah, just like in other places, the AfD has cast doubt on election integrity, as you mentioned, Devin, right? Without a shred of evidence, which only serves to erode trust in democracy. And well, if any of this sounds familiar, it's because, similar tactics were and are used during Donald Trump's election campaign in the US. And what is striking to me is the overlap between, those topics. So, circling back to my experience, how to tackle that, I think the most effective way is to debunk false claims. I mean, that requires, of course, being prepared with solid studies and facts ahead of time. And, we know we don't reach everyone. Some people simply won't be swayed by fact checking, but that doesn't mean it's not worth doing it, right? So I just want to give one example. We've developed in Germany at my own broadcaster. It's called a format called Fact Fox. And so we take popular claims, especially those circulating online, and thoroughly investigate them. And it's not about painting everything in black and white, say, yes, that's right, that's wrong. But instead, things can be right, but they are probably more nuanced, right? They're shades of gray, and offer a more complex picture. And so I think what gives us hope in Germany is that there's still a strong level of trust, especially in public service media. In fact, I looked up some, recent studies, and around 65% of Germans find it very trustworthy still, which is a big help when trying to counteract false information.
Dariela, I actually kind of want to popcorn to you because in this case, we actually see the government itself spreading disinformation about the results of the election. Can you speak a little bit to how your team has covered that?
Sure, yeah. I mean, the worst cases come from official sources, right? So, for example, Venezuela's National Electoral Council published results favoring Maduro without offering any supporting evidence, such as disaggregated, verifiable results by Electoral Center. 2 months have passed, and the National Electoral Council still haven't published anything. In the past, these results were available and auditable, but that has changed. So the question is, what do you do when the very institution meant to safeguard democracy starts operating within a post-truth framework? And when this happens, well, journalists need to double down on fact-checking, provide context, and work together with trusted networks to expose discrepancies. But it's very hard because you feel that you don't have anyone to go on and to report on it. And the goal is just to report the facts, but I guess to unite people who want discussions based on evidence.
Janet, I want to swing to you, especially on the next question, which is how do you engage audiences on the stakes, political platforms and, the results of the elections? In the South Africa case, as I'm sure you can tell us, we saw a situation where the ANC for the first time didn't have a majority of votes. How are you able to communicate what that meant to your audience, especially in the lead up to the elections where it seemed like that was a probable outcome, but maybe audiences didn't know exactly what that meant?
Yes, I mean, it was very much the unknown for everyone, really. Obviously, the political, or the ANC in particularly, was very, you could almost feel that they were not honest. I mean, obviously they were trying to win, and they were putting out misleading ideas, but we knew they were concerned. And just touching briefly before on the audience, just to mention, just because what Laura was saying, I really identified with this, is the rise of the right and populist movements and disinformation. Just quickly, we had a similar thing with quite a number of our parties, political parties, also using the immigrants and foreign nationals. They are the stick that they just people that get beaten all the time and used and scapegoated. So that was a major theme in us debunking, myths and the ways facts are or myths are and hearts distorted. So that was also a theme of the election and the build-up, and we would also look at manifestos, the manifestos of parties, and actually fact-check those. But just touching back on the preparing of the audience, we for the first time we created an election results dashboard, which we had for ourselves. That wasn't actually obviously relying on official results, but we actually created our own dashboard. And we tried and we used a lot of polling and tried to poll readers as well. We did a lot of our own engagement with our audience, and that was the first time we've done that. So we would actually try and engage them on how they were feeling and where, without actually obviously invading their privacy completely and saying who you're going to vote for. We were preparing them on that level and ourselves. So just creating the debate and talking about coalition governments. One of the big themes of we have a big public event, and we had it just quite before the elections, where one of the big topics was obviously on the coalitions and discussing coalitions and where coalitions work and where they don't, and what we have to prepare ourselves for the event of a coalition. So yeah, that's how you kind of prepare, but we still were not, I think the shock, it was a shock for everyone, you know, regardless of where you sit politically. It was, okay, oh my gosh, but now what's going to happen? And then there was this waiting game after the elections where there was the horse trading and everything going on behind the scenes, and we didn't know what was going on. And then you're relying on can be misleading information and sourcing that's not absolutely accurate. So it was a very tense time, that. And so the build up, you know, I think we had 2 weeks. It was 2 weeks to form a government, which is actually not a long time. And it was pretty last minute formation. So, but I think the main thing is just to engage with the audience. We did really up our game there on audience engagement and polling, and just hearing them and hearing trying to get a feeling for the nation talking to us and using our platform to engage, to prepare for what was pretty, I mean, obviously anything could have happened, but the polling was showing the ANC was not going to get its 50%. And in fact, they got a lot less. And in the party that I mentioned, Jacob Zuma's party, actually from nowhere got almost 15% of the vote nationally. It was incredible. So there was a lot of surprises, a lot of shocks and surprises there. So that they've become one of the biggest opposition parties overnight.
Laura, I kind of want to turn this back to you a little bit. The ANC failing to receive a majority is not exactly the same thing as the AfD surge in votes. These are kind of two separate things going on. But we're also talking about a surge of populism globally. How have you tried to just inform people about what this means for the AfD to take control of one state, or not control, because they haven't formed a government, but to be able to take first in one state and second in two others in Germany?
So, you know, I think it's really important to point out what the claims of the AfD are and how it would actually look like in a political coalition. And I mean, as Janet mentioned, right? So I think really holding parties accountable, especially the AfD, you know, looking into their party manifestos. I think that is like really important to let people know what it's saying on so many different political issues, because most of the time they don't really have solutions, right? It's more about bashing the current coalition on how they're doing, and to really pointing out what would a coalition look like, I think is very crucial from my point of view.
Dariela, do you have anything to add to this from the Venezuela experience?
Yeah, well, I think that Venezuela is like the worst case scenario here. Not a democracy, but still, it's important to have to be able to compare, right? So in Venezuela, overcoming censorship is just part of the battle. You also have to face news avoidance, a common reaction when living through a super long crisis with little hope for change. So that's why at EPITA, the Venezuelan media I founded, we innovated in storytelling, and we use humor, creativity, and curiosity to counter news fatigue and build a community. Humor, in particular, is an evidence-based way to cope with stress. And I want you to picture the meme of the dog with a cup of coffee sitting in a burning house. You know that, right? Well, I think the best version of our journalism should be like that cup of coffee. So a cup of coffee that raises our audience awareness without inducing panic. A cup of exceptional coffee, the kind that makes you want to come back tomorrow. A cup that helps our community to make better decisions. And a cup that becomes a comforting daily ritual, a compass that guides us in times of uncertainty.
I really like that. If I can just jump in, because I just thought about other examples we have in Germany to reach, you know, low information or news avoidant voters. So you know, basically kind of combining political education through gamification. So we have the so-called Valomat. So that is a tool comparing political party programs and manifestos, right? So voters can choose multiple choice statements and see which party program is aligning most to their views. And another one, which is actually from our own broadcaster, and it was produced by our data journalists. After Angela Merkel's time in office, they created an interactive page where users could estimate how metrics like unemployment rates developed during her administration, right? So basically painting a graph and see if they were right or wrong. And I mean, that just makes political information easier to retain for decision making, right? And one final example I want to point out to you guys is from our most popular newscast. It's called Tagesschau. And since July, it has been available in simple language. A survey that presents news in like easily understandable form, and it's aimed to people who have difficulty with complex texts or reports, right? Because sometimes it can just be overwhelming, and it's just easier to understand in everyday language.
Can I just, I think it's a really important discussion about the lightness of, you know, because of news avoidance, having to do things really differently and creatively. And we also had this similar sort of, we introduced a quiz, for instance, about elections, and that interactive quiz, which people really enjoyed. And we had game cards, and we, you know, it seems like, you know, you think, oh my gosh, do we have to stoop to these kind of sort of, they seem gimmicky, but they actually work, and it brings the audience in, and they can engage with it, and also younger audiences often. So we found those very popular, actually, and it was a whole new way in. And also videos, we had a lot more live video discussions straight after something happened, or with the results coming out. We would have our Ferial Haffiji, who is sort of a real veteran and just like the princess queen of journalism, really. She would come on and actually talk and interact with very sort of in very simple language about what was happening. And then we would also have that, and that was on video, like live. And then we would also have like some satire. We had some satirical writers actually, you know, just taking the piss, really, and, you know, hamming it up and really engaging. And those were some of the highest engagement. So it's like taking a serious matter and putting a light touch on it really does work without becoming too gimmicky. It's a fine line.
I find this really interesting that all three of you were saying like gamification, humor, these things that people who are otherwise very avoidant of the news or just exhausted with politics, exhausted with elections can re-engage. I think it's really applicable also to like across, you know, not just South Africa or not just Germany, but across the world, really. I wanted to turn to a little bit more of a different track of a subject, and it's a difficult question that I think all journalists are struggling with, and I would just like to hear your guys' thoughts on this. There's a question that's happening right now, and we're seeing it in the US, but we're seeing it around the world, which is, how can journalists be pro-democracy? How can they talk about the stakes of democracy and talk about what is at stake with some, especially populist parties, and the erosion of democracy that they can create without necessarily being partisan to one side? Nonpartisanship is an absolute core ethic of journalism. And I think we're all struggling with how can we maintain being nonpartisan while still talking about the stakes of that, talking about what matters. Do you guys have any insights of how you've dealt with that in your reporting? Anything you found to be successful for you? And I'll just let that question stand.
Well,
you go first.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. It's a very hard question. I think we journalists need to start by defining what democracy truly means, because it's often used as a buzzword, but like really understanding its foundations, history, and institutional structure, it's critical. So first, we need to educate ourselves on democracy, its principles, how institutions are supposed to reflect the popular will, and how they can be undermined. Because at the end, democracy is like a living system. It's imperfect, it needs constant care and vigilance. You cannot take it for granted. It's much like a plant that must be watered every day, and sometimes it needs extra attention. So our role is to inform the public so they can make informed decisions. And we need to find better ways to communicate effectively when a candidate or action threatens democratic values.
Laura, I think you had something to add to that.
I mean, that was, you know, definitely something I would 100% agree with you, Dariela. Maybe additionally, I personally find solution journalism and civic engagement to be valuable approaches, right? So in Germany, we have some big newspapers like the Rheinische Post or Süddeutsche Zeitung, and they engage in solution journalism. We also try that more and more at our broadcaster. And, you know, it's just focused on community responses to democratic challenges such as citizen participation in elections or local government initiatives to strengthen democratic engagement. And I think this type of coverage also promotes democratic participation without endorsing a specific political agenda. So I think I would like to add that.
I'd also like to flip this on this head. You know, what would you say that journalists who are, let's say, trying to be pro-democracy or who are trying to warn about maybe the threats of certain far-right or populist political movements, what are some don'ts that they should do? What are some things to avoid that you've seen other journalists do maybe that you feel like is unhelpful in this situation?
I think as I stated before, I think that is really crucial, is not just using narratives, right-wing populist parties, for example, or actually any party is using, right? I always try to, you know, think twice. Is that the right word to use it? Is it loaded? Can I find a narrative that is more nuanced or, you know, more objective? So I think, you know, thinking about a question, that would definitely my don't use.
Shannon or Dariela, do you have any don'ts that you would tell journalists?
I think the point, so it is a very hard issue, and I think everyone is increasingly grappling with it. And we've actually got in South Africa a situation where one of the party that had the third highest votes previously and is now on the fourth highest votes, the EFF, they actually officially banned Daily Maverick from reporting after they objected to some of our investigative journalism. Obviously, exposing them they had various reporting and investigations about their involvement. So the result was that they actually banned us. So that makes it very hard also to report. You want to be, you don't want to be biased, and you want to report accurately and fairly, and that's your mission. But it's very hard when you actually are officially banned from when you call up the EFF spokesperson and say we don't talk to Daily Maverick. And it also puts our team, there's a risk factor of people, going out into a meeting or a party meeting, and you don't know if they find out that they're from Daily Maverick, some of their supporters could get angry. So we really, that's how it affects us on the ground. And yet you want to be fair and not take sides. So that it is a very real issue in the coverage. And I mean, I think that we would not. So what we try to do is, as being pointed out here by Dariela and Laura, the need to just call out and think about the wording that you use when you are reporting on parties, and to actually interrogate it. I mean, we're not stenographers. And I think Daily Maverick's pretty strident in that way. We say we won't, we do have a perspective in terms of democracy, for instance. So, we will try and get to the bottom of things fairly and as accurately as we can. But it is a fine line where, you feel, is this going too far? And sometimes people get angry, the anger builds up in reporting when, especially like if you're excluded from, you can't get information. So it's a constant conversation. And I think the important thing is to actually talk about it and actually have an open conversation in the newsroom. Like, how are we going to tackle this? And being aware of some of the problems. And how do you deal with the rise in, the rise in populism, and where do you place the coverage in terms of being fair?
I want to, before we
Yes,
jump
I
go
completely,
ahead, Dariela.
not just a little thing. I completely agree with Laura and Janet. For me, sometimes in the US, it's shocking how many people don't see the value of democracy or understand its protections. Like, they take democracy for granted. And as journalists, maybe our responsibilities, and the challenge is how to create, this higher sense of purpose around democracy, fostering understanding of how your current living standards are actually intertwined with democratic principles. So for me, this is like a huge challenge, a very important challenge.
Yeah.
It's a really important point. Before we jump, we have one or two more questions that I want to ask, but I also want to turn towards our attendees who are on Zoom right now. If you have any questions for our panelists, we'll have like about 10 minutes at the end for that. So if you have it directed to any one panelist, please be able to say, I would like to ask this to Dariela or Laura, any one question, or it could be a general question. We'd love to hear from you. We would love to hear how we can answer some of the questions you've had around your reporting on elections and democracy. So please put them in the Q&A, no dumb questions. We want to hear it and we want to be able to answer them. So please put in the Q&A now as I ask one or two more questions on my end. So I'm going to pull up my last question. All three of you are women reporters, and we have seen a disproportionate attacks on women reporters, disproportionate versus male reporters, especially during politically and emotionally charged events like elections. So, this is more of a physical, digital safety issue, but how have you personally managed your mental health and personal safety or digital safety covering these elections? Janet, maybe we could start with you.
Okay, sure. One of the big, the women journalists get it definitely much harder than the male journalists. And in fact, we've worked quite a bit with the ICFJ about looking specifically at some of the attacks on our women journalists. We've been very fortunate, I suppose, in actually really drilling down and seeing the level of attacks on some of our women journalists. So that was a very interesting study that really did show the level, how it can be, and it can be a lonely space if you don't actually start recognizing it and calling it out. So that was actually a very interesting study that was done that really helped and it helped the journalists who are feeling persecuted and vilified, that there actually is someone actually taking notice and caring and collating and actually trying to look at trends. So it's very, and obviously during elections it gets very heightened, and the various parties calling, particularly going for women. And Farrell, who I mentioned before, she was called a cretin. She says that people call her, you get it constantly. But it comes from certain quarters, and often it's bots. It's often, you often can't actually try and find the source. And that's why the investigation is important, especially if there's campaigns against certain journalists. So a lot of that research that's been done is really, really helpful to actually see how these campaigns start. If it is not just some random person, it's actually politically motivated from a political party or a political person. And that's where quite a lot of the researchers sort of try to dig down deep to see how that is done. But I think overall it can be very, if you don't talk about it, it can have a chilling effect on journalists. And also they can feel very isolated and lonely because we've become so used to it that people actually almost just go, you just, it's just another attack, don't worry. But somebody, that those reporters are going home and they are feeling something, and it is very hard to not feel, even if it doesn't lead to any absolute attack, the feelings are there, and we need to call it out, and I think journalists need to rally a little bit more than we do around the issue to galvanize and say, actually, it's not okay. And especially around elections, especially if the political parties or their supporters are going, and it's the women journalists just get it, so it can be to the point where a lot of our journalists actually just go off social media. We've had that a lot, and then sometimes they'll take a break and then they'll come back, or so people deal with it very differently. Others actually confront and they actually call it out, and then they don't mind getting combative. But the space is obviously on particularly social media that it can get really ugly, and we haven't really, I don't think we've solved the problem. I don't think we really know how to really respond properly to it, or if you can respond properly and effectively. But I think they need to know that there's a support network, that it's actually not tolerated, and that they're doing a great job.
Yeah, I think also, I can't stress enough how important it is to feel supported by your employer, especially during those intense periods. So actually, what I thought was really interesting in the newsroom here, so in Atlanta, Georgia, I'm working with WABE, and we had a lot of reporters covering the shooting in Winder, the school shooting, which was horrible. I have to say I didn't report on it, but after that, we all came together, and we're, talking to each other, comforting each other. And especially our chief editor, he was like, right there saying, whenever you need to take time off, please do. And if you need psychological support, let me know. I will take care of it. So I think, even if you don't need it, or you don't think you need it, just to have the offer is really important, right? And I think that is really, really crucial. And journalists tend to be I don't know, they often think they can take anything in, but they can't, right? So just to be also aware and to allow yourself to be vulnerable is, I think, really, really important.
Yeah, I want to highlight that the stress of reporting under threats and intimidation can take a toll on our bodies. So personally, I have experienced disruptions in my menstrual cycle during particularly stressful events and coverages. So for women and menstruating persons, hormonal changes, whether due to menstrual cycles, menopause, or pregnancy, directly affect our energy and mood during coverages. In the past, we might have downplayed these factors, but I think it's time to address them openly and reduce the stigma, because sometimes these hormonal fluctuations can even give us unique mental states that provide new perspectives on complex issues. So I will say prioritizing mental health, setting boundaries, and building strong support networks, like Lauren Janet said, it's crucial to navigate these pressures effectively.
We have, I want to switch to some of the questions we have coming in. We have one question that's actually about, I'm going to try to distill this down. It's from Mohammed. Thank you, Mohammed, for putting a question in. We really appreciate it. It says the last goal of democracy is often economic prosperity in some cases. How do we communicate the importance of democracy in countries such as, and he said some countries in the Arab world, which are economically rich, but don't have elections, don't have public participation in them? How do we communicate beyond the economic benefits of democracy, the importance of it? I don't know if that's applicable to anyone's circumstances, but I'm wondering if you guys had any thoughts on that. Tough question. I personally want to jump off of something Dariela said, and maybe that can trigger something. Dariela talked about democracy being kind of like a body, that it's something that needs to be watered and fed and taken care of. And I think, just kind of like an idea going off here, to be able to communicate the importance of democracy not as something that results in an end goal, perhaps, but something that is a living, breathing system that has benefits for existing as that system. I don't know if that's something any of you guys have additional thoughts on, but that's how I would personally respond to this idea of what about countries that have economic prosperity but no democracy. Speaking to the idea of the value of the system itself, the value of having that organism that can engage in conflict, that can have debates, and also not see that result in violence or other forms of oppression. That's my personal view, but if you have any additional ones. Well, I'm going to then jump to, and any further questions we'd love to have, please add them. I want to jump to a question I have, which is, for journalists who are covering elections globally, what top piece of advice do you have? What recommendations do you have to anyone watching this, or who will be reading the recap afterwards, who will be watching the video afterwards, that they should just keep in their mind as they're covering future elections? As an example, I'm from the United States. We're going to a major election right now, but there's a lot of other elections that are coming up in the coming years, whether that be in Africa, Latin America. Europe has some big elections coming up. I know the German elections, the full German elections are coming in a year or so. So what top line advice would you have for journalists who are entering into elections?
I think, well, I mentioned, language issue, not trying to think twice about narratives and vocabulary you're using. And on another note, I'm a big advocate of constructive journalism. So, election coverage can often feel heavy and, downright depressing. I experienced that here in the US, for example. But I think it doesn't have to be all doom and gloom. That makes sense, right? So focus on constructive solution-seeking stories too. The resilience, the acts of civic duty, the ways people come together to make, democracy work. So, for example, I'm just working on a report about women who are trying to get people to register to vote. So I think, that is, an example to show, people make democracy, right? To highlight solution-based aspects of voting, and to remind people that all of them matter, and of the bigger picture of importance of participating in that process, really. So that would be my take.
Yeah, I think Laura touches on such. Sorry,
go ahead.
Interrupt. No, I think Laura touches on a very important thing about voter education. If you think of what can the media do? What can we as journalists do to actually boost democracy? And one of the things is voter education, especially when people are feeling fatigued and feeling like disconnected from a system. And we found, like in South Africa, the non-vote was actually a very substantial percentage of our overall vote, people who just didn't turn up, people who registered and then didn't go and vote. So we, in the build up to the elections, we made it quite a focus, was voter education, trying to help people navigate why they should, and the process. And it can be seen as like, not the most exciting journalism, but it really is user-friendly journalism. And that's where people look to us as a trusted source. Like, okay, so where can I go that I won't be under pressure politically, from a party? I'll get it from like a neutral source. And I think that's a very important role for journalists and the media to play. So that would be one advice as well. I think it's a really important thing to build into your coverage in the build up to elections, voter education. And because that also leads into other stories by just going there. And I mean, the other big, it's an obvious thing, but I think all too often, especially with cost cutting, is to just be on the ground. You just got to get out there. You've got to build in a way of reaching the people in whichever country's elections you're covering, and you can't do it over a screen. There's certain information you can get on a screen, but the only way you're going to find out is actually going and really engaging on the ground. And unfortunately, with cost cutting and budget pressure, that's often the first thing that goes. People don't go out of the cities, and they don't go out. What Maverick did is we actually it was the first time we got a sponsored vehicle. We actually got a car sponsor to actually assist us, and we obviously had to, it's not an uncontroversial thing to do, but then you have to disclose. You have to be very clear and obvious. But if it's a matter of getting out there, or not, it was made a huge difference, because we had these big 4x4s that could go off the beaten track and actually get us into areas that we would never have got to. So, you have to think creatively, and because revenue is so tight, you have to think, how am I going to be able to do that with credibly and ethically? So, and I think, so those are the preparations people need to make, newsrooms across everywhere need to make. Like, how am I going to get to the people that matter and make an impact?
Dariela.
Yes, I kept thinking on Mohammed's question. You know that Churchill's quote of democracy is the worst form of government except for all those other forms. So how can we communicate that rule of law and independent institutions are there to protect you? Like, maybe you have a good economic situation today in this type of countries, but you have no rights. So the day you have a problem with a powerful person, or the government, the corporations, or even a drug cartel, well, bad for you. You have no rights as a citizen. So this is why democracy is important. It's the only system where you really, have your rights. And well, regarding the recommendations for journalists covering upcoming elections, I have some. So first, think of news as a product. It's not just about the stories you tell, but how they are delivered and received. So this product mindset can help you serve your audience needs better and be more sustainable. The News Product Alliance offers free resources in English and Spanish to help think about this. Second, be multi-platform. In a world where platforms can get restricted or blocked and algorithms can be manipulated, it's important not to put all your eggs in one basket. So make sure your content reaches your audience through multiple channels. Third, always place national elections in a global context. So government, corporations may have vested interest in one candidate winning over another. That's why collaborative journalism is more essential now than ever. So engage in global journalism networks like IJNet and the International Center for Journalists to share resources and cross-border perspective, just like we are doing today. Understand how modern authoritarians work. So many come to power through democratic means and then erode institutions from within. In Venezuela, Chavez was elected democratically, but he left weak institutions that Maduro exploited to stay in power. So let's educate ourselves and our audiences on how this happens and the importance of strong, independent institutions. That will be my recommendations.
We have one last question that came in before I let you guys go. So I know we only have like 3 minutes left, so I'm going to let anyone take it who wants to. But I really like this question because a lot of our network is freelance journalists, and this is specifically talking about that. So this attendee asks, as a freelance journalist, I find it difficult to have an active part in covering elections. Newsrooms tend to have their trusted reporters and budgets are tight. How can we as freelance journalists contribute to elections coverage? What are areas or stories that newsrooms tend to not have means to cover themselves but are interested in? I'm going to let you guys popcorn that really quickly because we are running to the end right here.
I think so, just sharing some thoughts on the question, a really good question, actually. I think, firstly, try to build your own network, like with local electorates, maybe. And secondly, I think building expertise, finding a topic or area you're really passionate about, and then build expertise on that, right? Basically finding like a niche where like everybody is thinking of exactly you, let's say reproductive rights, just, making something up here. Or I don't know, you can deep dive into a special voting group because you're Asian American, something like that, just scanning the market, seeing, is there a niche, is there a gap which I can fill in. I think that is what I would do. Yeah.
Janet or Dariela, do you
Yeah,
have
I
any
think,
answers to that? Go ahead.
I think, yeah, I think the other thing to do is to obviously, and it's obvious really, but it cannot be really overstated, is to go where the journalists employed permanently are not going. So you kind of have to find that niche in a place that, and it does mean often being in a different area or something and looking for the gaps. So really understanding the titles that you are looking at, wanting to write for. And actually saying, well, where are you looking and seeing where the gap is and giving them something really compelling that they really need for their overall sort of taking. And it's actually looking quite closely and pitching stories at particular platforms, but targeted. I mean, not to just, so you actually got to be quite careful and selective about where you take your stories. And one story might suit a certain publication, but not another. And I think that's where you can actually really find, and obviously in the good old fashioned scoop, and sometimes it's an interview that you manage to pin down that no one else has. But you really do need to know your market. You need to know the different publications and understand how they work, because it can be so hard to knock on those doors and get access if you're not coming from that just what people need. The news editors and everyone are so busy that it's quite hard to knock those doors down. So you've got to really hit them in the eyeballs and say, look, I've got something that really is worthwhile. It's tough, and it's relationships. It's building networks and, building a relationship.
Yeah, I will only add, first, we need more money for better coverages across the world. I wish it was different, but do something first, something good, even if you are not getting paid, and leverage social media to see if your report, your article, your video can be seen, and you will get attraction for media outlets, especially if you are a freelance journalist or if you are starting.
Well, we are at time right here. Laura, Dariela, Janet, thank you so much for a really informative session. I think our journalists have taken a lot from this. If you didn't manage to watch this live, obviously you're watching the recording right now, but there will also be a recap we will publish within a week on IJNet.org. So please keep an eye out for that. We'll also be posting that on the IJNet Pamela Howard forum. For all of you guys watching us live on Facebook, thank you again for watching. And we will have another session ready for everyone in 2 weeks. So please keep an eye out for that as we put out some social around that. Once again, Laura, Dariela, Janet, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your advice. And we really wishing you guys the best of luck in reporting on your countries, and then wishing me the best of luck as we report on the US elections coming up soon.
Oh, yes.
So
thank you, Devin, for organizing everything and, moderating that so nicely. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks for everybody participating in that. I think, having panels like that, especially if they're remote and everybody can tune in from wherever, it's just amazing.
Yeah, thank you for a very enriching conversation. Thank you, Maria, for the comment. And well, all take care. Keep working.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Seb. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.